Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the anatomy of a massive, massive fraud. We're going to unpack an absolutely incredible true story of ambition, manipulation, and deception that literally shook the foundations of a developed nation. We'll be looking closely at the specific mechanics and honestly, the sheer psychology of a man whose very name became synonymous with the ultimate scam. Picture this. You arrive in America with exactly $2.50 in your pocket. How on earth do you manage to pull off a staggering $20 million scam? To put that into perspective, in today's money, that translates to well over $300 million. It's just an unbelievable financial scale, especially when you compare it to his incredibly humble beginnings. The answer to this question really requires us to dig deep into the mind of a true con artist. And to understand how he did it, we first have to look at his place in history.
Part 1. The King of Con Men.
Okay, let's dive into this. Throughout history, the world has obviously seen its fair share of master manipulators. You've got guys like Natwarlal, who literally sold the Taj Mahal, and Victor Lustig, the man who actually sold the Eiffel Tower for scrap metal, twice. But Charles Ponzi, he took fraud to an entirely new level. The most fascinating thing is that he didn't have some prestigious financial degree. He wasn't a big Wall Street banker or an expert. Instead, he weaponized the American dream and people's absolute greatest weakness, the desire to get rich quickly. He used the pure art of winning trust to con innocent people out of $20 million in just a few short months. But seriously, where does a mind like that come from? What drives someone to steal on that kind of magnitude?
That brings us to Part 2, Forging a Fraudster.
Well, Charles was born in Italy back in 1882 to a family whose wealth was already a thing of the past. His mother, who actually came from a noble background, found this poverty just completely unbearable. So she planted these lofty dreams in young Charles's mind about regaining that lost status. And, this upbringing instilled a massive ego in him. He firmly believed he had to make a great deal of money, whatever it took. He attended the University of Rome, but spent literally all his time trying to keep up with the wealthy kids, and eventually ended up dropping out. In 1903, his family scraped together what little they had to send him to America to make something of himself. But get this, he gambled it all away on the ship over. He arrived in Boston with just that $2.50. Yet, that massive ego remained fully intact. Even while he was washing dishes in Boston and sleeping in these foul-smelling rooms, he carried himself and talked big, acting like an owner. He just firmly believed he was born to rule the world. Which brings us to a huge pivotal lesson he learned in 1907. Ponzi had moved up to Montreal, Canada, and got a job at a bank for Italian immigrants called Banca Zerosi. Now, the bank was luring people in with this unbelievable 6% interest rate, but Ponzi uncovered the dark truth behind it, the strategy of robbing Peter to pay Paul. The bank's owner was simply taking new depositors' money to pay the old ones. Naturally, when the scheme inevitably collapsed, the owner fled to Mexico. Ponzi was left penniless once again, but he learned a highly, highly dangerous formula that day. He learned that if you can just sell confidence, even the biggest lie can shine exactly like the truth.
And he actually put that theory to the test by forging a client's signature on a check in that same empty bank office. He was caught and spent 3 years in a Canadian jail. But he didn't reform. After his release, he started illegally smuggling Italian immigrants into America, got caught again, and spent 2 more years in an Atlanta federal prison around 1912. But you have to understand, this wasn't just a punishment for him. It was a masterclass. He spent his time rubbing shoulders with cunning mobsters and fraudsters, learning the dark art of criminal psychology. He learned exactly how to manipulate people's greed and their fear. By the time he was released, he was an experienced con artist actively searching for bigger prey. Fast forward a few years to 1919 in Boston, and we hit the exact moment his life changed forever.
Part 3. The $1 Million Loophole. And this brilliantly illustrates the core mechanic of his famous scam. After failing at a publishing business, Ponzi noticed a small piece of paper called an International Reply Coupon, or IRC, sitting right on his desk. After World War I, the global economy was in total turmoil. European currencies had essentially collapsed, but the US dollar was strong. Yet the postal exchange rates were still based on old pre-war agreements. Ponzi realized he could theoretically buy cheap IRCs in countries like Italy for about a cent, ship them to America, trade them for US postal stamps worth 5 cents, and then sell the stamps for cash. On paper, it looked like a guaranteed 400% profit loophole. But the reality on the ground was that shipping millions of coupons and selling individual stamps was logistically impossible, and the overhead costs would completely swallow that profit. Ponzi, however, didn't care about the truth at all. He just needed a story that could sell the beautiful, intoxicating dream of getting rich overnight. Let's move into part 4, an empire of illusion. Let's look at the math here. Ordinary banks in the 1920s were offering barely 2 to 3% annually. Ponzi opened the Securities Exchange Company and promised a 50% return in 45 days, or 100%, literally doubling your money, in just 90 days. When a few early investors took the leap, Ponzi actually paid them, sometimes even before the due date. He was, of course, just using the new investors' money, the exact same rob Peter to pay Paul strategy he learned back at Banca Zarasi. But this math created such explosive social proof that it completely blinded even highly educated people to the immense risks. Word spread through the city like wildfire that Charles Ponzi could turn dust into pure gold. This mania created a dizzying facade of success. Before long, he was raking in millions of dollars every single day. The frenzy was so intense that cash was literally overflowing from the cupboards and desk drawers in his office. He bought a massive 16-room mansion in Lexington, which was Boston's most affluent area. He showered his simple, down-to-earth wife, Rose, in incredibly expensive jewels and clothes. People would literally stand outside his house for hours just to catch a glimpse of him. They treated him like a Hollywood superstar. This opulent lifestyle was a crucial psychological tool. It effectively erased any lingering doubts from the public mind. People thought, well, if he's already this unbelievably rich, why would he ever cheat us? The massive illusion had entirely masked the terrifying reality. But as we know, every illusion has an expiration date, and an empire built on lies is fragile. The relentless spotlight of the press finally began to melt Ponzi's waxwings. Which brings us to part 5, the House of Cards. The Boston Post newspaper started digging. Their editor simply couldn't swallow the idea that any business could double money in 90 days when standard banks were doing 2% a year. So they brought in a financial expert named Clarence Barron to audit Ponzi's model. And Barron hit them with a massive number, $160 million. That is the staggering amount of international reply coupons Ponzi would physically need to have in circulation to fulfill the wild promises he had made to his investors. Now, what's really interesting about this is the harsh reality check, 27,000. That was the actual total number of coupons circulating in the entire world at that time. He needed 160 million, but only 27,000 even existed globally. The math was completely, undeniably absurd. How could you possibly trade in something that didn't even exist in those quantities? The Boston Post instantly ran a massive headline declaring the business a huge fraud, sparking a rapid, chaotic collapse. Absolute panic erupted. Thousands of angry investors mobbed his office to demand their money back. But Ponzi didn't hide. In an absolute masterstroke of confidence, he had hot coffee and donuts brought out to the angry mob, looked them right in the eye, and asked if they trusted him or the newspaper. He gambled big, refunding $2 million in 3 days. And remarkably, his trick worked. The mob's panic melted away, and many actually handed their money right back to him. But the authorities were already closing the net. They ordered a total freeze on all new investments pending an official audit. And remember that rob Peter to pay Paul rule? The very moment fresh money stopped coming in, the House of Cards instantly shattered. By August 12, 1920, the audit revealed a catastrophic $7 million deficit. Around 40,000 innocent people, many of them poor working-class laborers, had lost their life savings. So, the crucial point is the ultimate truth of it all. Out of all those millions of dollars, Charles Ponzi never bought a single IRC coupon. Not one. The entire business model, from the very first day, was a complete and total fabrication, built solely on lies, manipulated trust, and the cash of the next victim in line. This leaves us with a rapid, pathetic downfall and a permanent dark stain on the financial world. Part 6. A legacy of lies. Let's move ahead and see how this builds a timeline of an entirely unrepentant criminal. In 1920, he was sentenced to federal prison. When he got out, the state of Massachusetts immediately hit him with state charges. But even when he got out on bail in 1926, he didn't stop. He ran down to Florida and started selling worthless swampland, promising 200% returns in 60 days. Obviously, he was caught again. In 1930, to avoid authorities, he staged his own death, shaved his head, and tried to flee to Italy by washing dishes on a cargo ship. But his massive ego just couldn't stay quiet. He was recognized, arrested, and finally, in 1934, deported to Italy. Even his incredibly loyal wife, Rose, was broken by then, and she divorced him. He eventually bounced around and made his way to Brazil, living an anonymous life as a modest translator. In 1949, he died blind, paralyzed, and penniless in a charity hospital in Rio de Janeiro, buried in an unclaimed grave. But shortly before his death, he gave a reporter one last interview, leaving us with this truly chilling quote. "I gave them the greatest show ever seen on this earth for $15 million. This just perfectly captures his ultimate hubris. Even on his deathbed, he didn't see himself as a criminal who ruined 40,000 lives. He proudly saw himself as a magnificent performer.
Which brings us to a final lingering question. Charles Ponzi gave the world a permanent term for financial fraud, the Ponzi scheme. But his legacy certainly didn't die in that anonymous grief. When Bernie Madoff's $65 billion scam was exposed in 2008, the world immediately recognized it as the exact same model. The same goes for massive modern frauds everywhere. Charles Ponzi proved that if you play on people's hopes and their desire for an easy shortcut, they will willingly blind themselves to the risks. So as long as human greed and the burning desire for a quick fortune exist, who will be the next Charles Ponzi? And, perhaps more importantly, armed with this knowledge, will you be able to see through the illusion before it's too late? Thank you for exploring this fascinating anatomy of a fraud with me on This Explainer. Keep questioning and stay sharp.